We're up to Perek Cain, Derech Hashem by the Ramchal, Rabbi Chaim Nutzato. And in this Perek, it's very interesting because in this Perek he talks about the components of the Bria. What is creation made of, basically, you know? Those are the components of different types of beings. What is it made up of, and so on. Which in many ways is fascinating to see who our neighbors are, if you want to use that word, you know. And you'll find that there's a lot of very interesting beings, so to speak, out there, you know. And obviously they all exist because they all contribute in some way to the whole purpose of man. And that's really the essential idea. It's the whole tachlis of the Bria, the whole purpose of creation. We know, of course, is that there's an individual or being called a Jew, right? And his job is to do mitzvahs, which for the specific intent of purifying matter, to dematerialize the universe. It's really what it's all about. And therefore to take the universe, which is called this universe, Olam HaGeshem, the physical world, to take it and to retransform it into a spiritual place. See, most people think that, well, if you do a certain job, especially other religions, if you do a certain job, then you're going to wind up in a certain place. You see, that's what they think, you know. That if you do the right thing, you're going to wind up in heaven, or you're going to wind up whatever, you know. But it's always another place, because this place is terrible, right? So you got to go to another place. You see, you know. But really, that's a false idea. The truth is that what the job of a Jew is not to go anywhere; it's to stay here, but to retransform this world into a spiritual world. That's the incredible thing. It's not a matter of leaving and going somewhere else. It's a matter of changing the environment or changing the matter, literally, you know, of this world, you know. And the way we do it, of course, is through mitzvahs. That's the way we do it, you know. So that's the purpose of creation. And that's called zikuch. Zikuch means to purify or to decontaminate something, which means that if there's a substance and that has a contaminant, so when you decontaminate it, then you've purified it. You see, so that's really what the whole concept. You know, it's interesting. I once asked a guy. There's a malacha called boirer in Shabbos. Boirer means literally to select, right? So the guy told me he was learning boirer. You know, he was learning that particular activity which is forbidden on Shabbos. You know, if you have two things in front of you, you have good and bad, right? And you want to select, right? You want to take the good and bad as relative terms. Let's use the term desired and undesired, you know? So what you do is you take the desired, whatever. But if you take the undesired out because you want to leave the desired, and then, you know, that's called boirer, whatever, right? So I asked him, well, what exactly is the essential idea of boirer? So he said, you know, I've been learning it for 3 months, I really have no idea. I can tell you what it is, but I can't really tell you what's called the malacha, what the activity is. I don't know. It's astounding. You know, I met so many guys that learn boirer and they have no clue. They can tell you the halachas, but they don't really know what is it that the Torah is particular about not to be done. It's called the Hakpadas HaTorah. What exactly is it? Because every malacha, every activity in Shabbos, right, there's some specific, which I call forbidden key point that the Torah says no. That's the idea. You have to identify it. Anyway, he didn't know, and most people don't know. But the interesting thing about it, and that's why you see why I bring it down, is because I said, okay, let me give you 3 examples. Okay? That's all you need to know. Forget about 2-3 months in the kollel. 3 examples, okay? That's okay. You have in front of you on the table, you're sitting, and there's an apple. And you take the apple and you give it a crunch. What have you done? besides the eating of it, right? Well, you've displaced the apple. You've repositioned the apple, correct? That's all you've done. Well, that's not boira, right? That's not selecting. You just repositioned an apple, right? That's the effect, okay. It's okay, now you have 2 apples. Yes, you got 2 apples. And you see one and you take one and to eat, right? What have you done? Right? So, number one, you've repositioned one apple, right? But the second thing you did is you separated this apple from that apple. Yes? Okay. That's not boira, right? Then I said, I'll give you a third case. The third case is, let's say I have an apple and an orange. Okay? 2 apples, 2 oranges, whatever, right? And I don't want the orange, right? I just want the apples. So what I do is I take an orange away from the group. So what have I done? Well, the first thing you've done is you've repositioned the orange. Yes? Second thing you've done is you've separated the orange from the apple. You separated 2 things, correct? But that's not boira either. So what is it? Because you removed the orange, which is a contaminant to the apple. You purified the apple. There's a group of apples, right? And the orange is sitting smack in the middle of that group. You don't want the orange. So when you remove the orange, what are you really doing? You are purifying what's left, which is only apples. Or you've decontaminated. You see? That's boira. So you realize that boira is not repositioning. Boira is not selecting or separating. No. Boira is to take that which is a contaminant, and there's a definition for that. Let's say basically it's undesired, away from a group, and therefore allowing the rest of the group to be only one substance, basically. That's called decontamination. That's boira. You see? So that activity, when you think about the hashkafa, right? So what is the, if you look at that, so what's the mixture? Therefore, boira has to have 2 halachas always. There always has to be a mixture of a contaminant and a desired, or else you're not purifying. If there's something that doesn't belong there and it isn't there, you're not decontaminating. You're not purifying. There's got to be something you don't want there with something that you do want. That makes it boira. And not only that, the second rule is that they have to be close, proximity. There has to be a group. If you have an apple here and an orange in the other part of the room, and I take the orange away, it was never contaminated, you see? That's why boira needs 2 things. It needs that which you do not desire, which is the contaminant, right? And they have to be close together, or because then it's not contaminated. What have you done? So those are the 2 fundamental rules of boira, you see. Anyway, in the bria, there's boira. What is the boira? What does the bria have? What does creation have? Right? What are the components in terms of the state of the universe? Well, the first thing is that the universe is geshem, is material. You see, it's geshem, whatever material is, right? It's a physical thing, right? So that's the first thing. So what's the contaminant? The contaminant is the zoyama, is the pollution of the Satan after the sin of Adam Harishon, right? So that's the problem, you see. But really the bria is what? So let's say, so the first act of decontaminating is you need to remove the tumah, the pollutant, the contaminant from a physical universe, which is you got to get rid of the evil, right? That's boira. Really, when you think that's a classic act of boira, is to remove tumah, zoyama, whatever the pollution of the Satan is, right, into the universe, physical universe. You want to remove that. So that's the first act of boira, you see. But now that if you remove the influence of the Satan on the physical universe, which by the way is the second law of thermodynamics, which is everything decomposes or whatever and so on. You know, if you remove that, so can you do anything else? Is the universe still contaminated? And the answer is yes. It's contaminated with physicality. You remove that, what are you left over with? A spiritual universe. See, we don't realize something which is very interesting. We don't create a spiritual universe. It's here, but it's been contaminated with physicality. Interesting way of looking at it, you see? This is the problem. It's that the spiritual universe has been rendered with a physical contaminant, and that's called geshem, materialism or physicality. It has been rendered contaminated a second time after the sin of Adam Harishon. You see what I'm saying? You know, so because the Satan has now empowered over the universe, and he injects into it, so to speak, a thing called zoyama, which is his influence, his pollutant, his contamination. You see? So all of this is on top of a spiritual universe. Therefore, we need to remove what? The first thing to remove the zoyama, to remove that contamination of the Satan, right? That's out. And that's an act of pure boira, isn't it? And that's why it's also on Shabbos, because it's one of the creative acts. And the second act of boira is to remove the physicality itself, which, you know, look at a person and say, what? What do you mean remove the physicality? That's what the universe is. It's not. We don't realize that this universe is spiritual, you know, and what has been embedded in this universe is physical substances, the material universe. Yes, that was the original contamination. Adam Rishon sin added the second contamination, you see. So the job of the Jew is called zikuch. Zikuch means to purify, you see. So the job of the Jew is to purify this universe, right? Which means to remove the physicality of the universe, leaving a spiritual universe. That's really what the whole job of the Jew is, you see. But it happens in levels, gradations, you see. Because even spirituality is contaminated, which is interesting. You see, we don't realize it, but even a spiritual universe has blockage. For instance, if you remove the physicality of this world is called Olam HaGeshem. Yes? Olam HaGeshem is the world of materialism or material physicality, right? Well, you certainly can't see the spiritual because it's being blocked by the spiritual. Okay, let's remove it. So first we get rid of the Zoyama, right? Okay. That's Mashiach ben Yosef. Along comes Mashiach ben David, right? And he's got to get rid of the Geshem. So he does that. So now we're standing at the end of the world, the 6,000 years. The world is over. In the English year 2240, right? And the world is over. That means the world is over in 222 more years. Even the Mashiach's reign has to end. So so Mashiach ben David, he removes what? What do you call it? The physicality. So now at the end of the year 6,000, which is 2240, right? We are now in a world which is spiritual. That's called the 7,000th year. It's called the Elef HaShvi. But does that Elef HaShvi exist now? Yes. That's called Olam Yetzira. That is called the world of formation, right? And right now there is. So this world now becomes Olam Yetzira, or was added on to that, you see. And that takes 1,000 years, right? Then what happens is the Olam Yetzira is now filtered, you see, purified, right? Its blockage is removed, because it also has a block. Because even denizens, residents of that world, Malachim, they also have a limited view. Because there's some type of a blockage there, you see. So the next, from 6 to 7 is, this world becomes Yetzira. From 7 to 8,000 years, right, then Yetzira becomes Bria, which is a higher dimension, you see. And then from 8 to 9, right, again the spiritual world is further refined, and it becomes Atzilus, which is the greatest spiritual world of Olam Hazeh, which means this world, you see. So by the time you're in the 8,000th year, what happens? You have moved up. Look how many filterings you've done. You see, you've done Zoyama, you've done Geshem, physicality, then you moved into Yetzira, into Bria, and into Atzilus. And Atzilus is beyond, we cannot master any of these worlds. And then from the 9,000th year, right, then Bria, which is a higher spiritual dimension, itself again is filtered, and that becomes what's called Adam Kadmon, which is Olam Haba. That's the highest spiritual world, and there is no more blockages in that world. See, that's what the job of the Jew, to again retransform. It's a constant filtering process. That's the job of the Jew, you see. So therefore, in order to aid all of this stuff, right, the Rebbe Hashem had to create many, many different components to allow the Jew to do this filtering process, you see. And of course, what happens as the Jew himself, as the worlds become filtered, it doesn't only apply to the world itself, right, but applies to the Jew. His own body becomes filtered, you see. So right now we're physical beings, right? And then we turn into spiritual beings, higher spiritual beings. You see, until you get to Olam Haba, where we have no concept of what we will be in that world, you see. And then we are the spiritual beings of the greatest amount of spirituality, you see. And then it just continues in that way. So, that's the task of a Jew in a nutshell. And therefore, all the components that the Moshe made was obviously to allow this process to happen. So the Ramchal is now going to tell you the components of the world. Okay, so he says that the basic divisions, how many different types of beings are there really, you know? And each one has its nature, the laws that govern that being, the limits, the properties, the limits, the laws, you know, just like this universe. There's laws that govern this universe. There's gravity, you know, all kinds of the properties of matter. So there are really three kinds of universe, three kinds of dimensions, so to speak. One is physical, right? Obviously. And the second one is called spiritual domain. But there's a third domain, and that's called God. That's a domain of the divine. God is not physical and he's not spiritual. Because even spirituality, it's just a different type of matter. It's a spiritual matter instead of a physical matter, you see. But the Rebbe Hashem is not matter, you see. So the Rebbe Hashem is neither obviously physical, clearly not, and he's not ruchnius. What he is unknown. That goes back to the first parak of the Ramchal in terms of who is God. But never make the mistake of thinking that the Rebbe Hashem is spiritual. He's not. Not at all. Actually, that itself can be subdivided, you see. Because I'll just briefly mention, what is not physical or spiritual is really the Ein Sof. The Ein Sof, which is the Shekhinah at the highest level of Shekhinah, it's the greatest presence of God, is the Ein Sof. God in that appearance is not at all physical or spiritual, clearly not, you see. So even that, the Shekhinah, is not spiritual at all. But the Rebbe Hashem beyond the Shekhinah, because there's a God in terms of his appearance, which means that he can be known to man, even though we have no concept of what the Ein Sof is, the infinite being called God. But then there's the Rebbe Hashem called Atzmusoi, who he really is, which is unknown. That's not even, you can't even use it, it's not spiritual, it's nothing as far as we're concerned. It's beyond the concept even of some type of a matter or anything like that. But anyway, so Ramchal says that this world consists of Gashmim and Ruchniim. It consists of physical beings and spiritual beings. Okay, that's the basic division of the whole Bria, basically. And then he says, what's the definition of a Geshem? How do we define Gashmiyim? Okay, so he says that those beings which are perceptible to us at any level, that's called a being that is Geshem. A being that is imperceptible or non-perceptible at all is Ruchni. That's very subtle, you see. Because when you look at this world, think about that. It's a very subtle distinction. You know, if I asked you, right? In this world, we can't see everything, okay? So are they physical? For instance, if you turn on your radio, it plays. Well, how'd that happen? It's called a radio wave. Is a radio wave physical? Interesting question. And the answer is yes, it is. Because you can turn on the radio and hear the, you know, in other words, you can receive the effects of a radio wave. Therefore, a radio wave is physical. However, a radio wave clearly is not physical the way that we imagine, you see. It's electromagnetic radiation. It's energy. Is energy physical? Of course it is. What is it? Nobody knows. You know, the world is divided into matter and energy. Matter we know, right? Because clearly it's perceptible. But the world is divided into matter and energy. You see, nobody knows what energy is. I always got a kick out of the old definition of energy, the capacity to do work. That's not a definition. That's a consequence. If you have energy, you can go do something, you know? But what is energy itself? Nobody knows. The major idea of energy is that it can push. It's a force that can push. That's all we know about what it is. But what is energy? Unknown. In other words, the way energy always manifests itself is always by motion. In other words, how is something in motion? Because it has energy that's pushing it. You see? That's how we know energy, you know? If everything in the universe was motionless, it would be an interesting concept. Would there be energy? Interesting concept, you know? If nothing moved, it means absolute stationary, which, by the way, there's no such thing. You know? Everything moves. Everything, you know. It may move very slow, you know. I mean, what is the measure of something moving? What is it? And the answer is it's heat. Heat. What is heat? Heat is nothing more than the random motion of molecules. Molecules moving. So if they move too quick and they bounce against your hand, it's called heat. Burns you. You see, when you freeze matter, molecules, which is the smallest unit of matter, before it becomes an atom, right? When you freeze it, it moves very slowly. You see, and but the motion of molecules is measured in terms of heat. You know, so the faster it moves, the greater the heat. You know, the slower it moves, then it's called cold. Absolute zero. Absolute zero is when the molecule stops all motion, and it's impossible to reach that stage. They've already reached the stage of molecular freezing. I think they were like a millionth degree off absolute zero, which is incredible, you know. But if something was stationless or motionless, would it have no energy? Interesting. It was everything in the universe is moving. Everything. Every molecule is moving. Everything is moving, you know? So the question is, like I said, you know, if there was no motion, would there be energy? And the answer is yes, you know? And the reason for that is because, according to Einstein, he realized that matter is nothing more than frozen energy. It means if you take energy and freeze it, it becomes a particle. It's amazing. You know, that's the great, one of the greatest discoveries of all, you know, that matter and energy are equivalent. But what I'm trying to show is that even energy is physical, right? We can't see energy, we don't even know what it is. You see, a radio wave is physical. You see, light, is light physical? Of course it's physical. Nobody has ever seen light. Light enables us to see everything else. But nobody has seen a light wave, which is called a photon, and so on, you know? So the physical universe itself has many things that are what do you call it, that cannot be known directly, but we can experience them. That's the key to perception. Perception doesn't mean to see them. It means we can experience them, and therefore they are detectable. That's what the very interesting thing to understand, you know. So the physical universe encompasses far more than just the physical things, you see. And
it's possible to detect spirituality?
No, impossible.
Let's say
unless
the malach will come and move my cup, and I see the cup moving.
Yeah.
So does that make the malach physical in a sense?
No.
Why is
because his ability to interact with that cup, right, is through spiritual means.
But I see the effect, though. I see the effect of it. I can perceive it.
You can perceive the consequence, but you do not perceive the spiritual being that is causing that. For instance, you know, there are people who saw Malachim. Avram Avinu, remember those 3 guys showed up? Or the one who came to Shimshon's father, Mendel, remember that? You know, he saw him. How does that work? And the answer is, what the Malach does is he creates a physical costume. It's physical, you see, but he's not the costume. It's literally like somebody puts on a costume. But he's not that. So a malach is able to create a costume that he can put on, or is like, you know, like a suit, you know, and you could see the malach through the suit. But you never could. But if the malach took off the suit, you could never see the malach. See, that's what the Ramchal's definition is. You cannot see or experience in any way a spiritual entity unless he decides to use this physical world to costume himself. You see? And that's very important. Yeah, go ahead.
When I sleep.
When you sleep?
When I'm sleeping, I don't remember a thing. But when I wake up, I thank God for returning my soul.
Okay.
So I don't know where my soul went. But when I'm sleeping, am I in a physical world or am I going to a spiritual world? You
are in a physical world. But your neshama, you see, well, we'll get to that.
Okay.
Because that's the combination. Well, you hold on off of that. Because first I have to, Ramchal is classifying the entities. So right now he simply says that anything physical can be experienced in some manner. If it's really spiritual, forget about it. Unless a spiritual being wishes to, in some way, to garb himself in some physical way, but it's never that. He just can control the matter. That's all. You see. So therefore, that's a physical and that's a spiritual entity. Okay, and these things themselves are subdivided. Okay, what is a subdivision of the physical? Well, I've given you one, right? And so within the matter of the universe, you have matter. You have energy, right? That's the physical universe itself, okay? But the Ramchal says also that there are physical things called the Galgalim and the Kochovim. Now this is astrology, you know. Astrology is a study. Astrology recognizes, you know, that the stars, planets, and their orbits actually have influence on us. You know, I mean, this of course is rejected by science. Astrology is rejected. They have astronomy. Astronomy is the study of the heavenly bodies and so on, you know. But nobody ever assumes that any of these heavenly bodies, stars, sun, planets, meteors, comets, have any kind of influence on us other than maybe gravity if they get too close. You know what I'm saying? But, you know, but that they should have an influence on our lives, character-wise or whatever, forget it. You know, there's no such thing, you know. But in terms of the Chazal, and you see that from Mitzrayim and so on, there is such a thing called astrology. You know, what astrology says is that the heavenly bodies, no matter what they are, do have an influence on our lives. You know, that's what astrology is. So therefore, he says that the physical universe consists of the people, us, and all the heavenly bodies, which have influence over us. the heavenly bodies are clearly physical, you see. Now, later on, he tries to explain that. What do you mean? You mean some star, 3 billion light years away? How in the world, what does it even mean that they have some type of influence over us? What does that mean? You know what I'm saying? I mean, this is like, it seems like such primitive understandings and so on, you see. But what he probably means, and I think he explains it later on, is that it's not that they can do anything, but the configuration of stars and all the heavenly bodies, right? They act in ways which reflect the configuration of the spheres. They're indicators. That's really what they are. And somehow the influence of the spheres, which we will learn is the spiritual entities and so on, that the stars, it's like a thermometer, you know? A thermometer is an instrument, it's an indicator of your temperature. You know what I'm saying? But the thermometer doesn't create the temperature, it just measures it, you see? The stars and all the heavenly bodies, they don't create the shefa, the influence on us. What they do is they allow the influence on us because of the spiritual entities which we will learn about in this pair and so on. So they reflect exactly the gezeres, or the what do you call it, the influences, it's called the hashpos of the spiritual entities called spheres. So therefore, what's interesting about that is, if you want to know what that tells you, so these are what's called the intermediaries. The mediators, the mediators, or the intermediaries or barometers or indicators of the spheres, which is interesting. That means if you know the real astrology, not today, you know, the real astrology, and let's say you know it and so on, you can actually figure out at any given point there's certain spheres that influence in this way and that way and so on. It's a whole chokhmah. You can actually read that by the astrological signs. Very interesting. That's what it means, you see? So that can be understood. It's not that Sirius, which is the brightest star in the sky, can actually have influence over you. But when you're born, that's really when it really kicks off. If you're born at a certain time, and let's say Mars is Shoilet, which means that the planet Mars is in however, it's a whole, Mars is in the house, this house and that house. It's like, I gotta say, you know, and so on, you know. What that indicates is that the forces of the spheres, when you're born, you can actually see what spheres were influenced at that moment in time, and therefore what they gave you, what they left you with. So the planets are intermediaries of the spheres. That's what it means, you see? Not that they have any kind of... Now, why the Moshe needs stars and all that, or what does that mean? Apparently, that's the whole concept of why you need astronomical bodies, is that they should be able to reflect the true meaning of the spheres. And those spheres, spiritual entities called spheres, which are the emanations of God, they are the ones who truly cause everything. So that's how you can understand astrology. You know. So next time, when you join Astrology 101, you'll know exactly what they aim, what the underlying idea is. You know, like what in the world is this? You know, and this is what Chazal. This is whatever the true nature of astrology really is. But anyway,
Blood moons.
Who?
Blood moons.
Blood moon.
Yeah, the red moon. Remember?
Yeah, I spoke about the blood moon. Yeah, for the tetrad. Yeah. It indicates a gezerah, the fact that there were 4 blood moons consecutively on 4 Yom Tovim, if you remember that, and that it means that a messianic time would start. I gave a whole shir on that. Yeah, that's what it would indicate. It was the moon when it turns red so many times, you know, it would indicate that there's something happening in the spiritual domain. It's an indicator, that's all. It's like a thermometer. You know, but not that they have the power to do that, you see. Okay. But anyway, so the physical universe consists of these two things: the planet Earth and all its residents, and the heavenly bodies and what it can do. That's the physical universe. Okay? Yeah. Now, the spiritual universe, he says, these are beings that have absolutely no materiality to them. Nothing. Okay? And therefore, because of that, they cannot in any way be detectable. Either experienced or detectable at all. Okay? And that's what distinguishes them from the physical. I would like to add one very interesting concept, you know. People make a tremendous mistake on what spirituality is. I'll give you an example. For instance, in India, so you have a whole discipline called yoga. Okay, and what the yogis try to do is by meditation, they try to reach certain states of consciousness. That's what they try to do. Interesting discipline, so on, you know. And what they do is they develop the ability to meditate, okay? And fundamentally, without getting into the whole thing, you know, what they can do is that they have the ability to focus on a single object to such an extent where all thoughts, feelings, sensations are gone. It's like a laser beam. They can focus their concentration to such an extent where they don't experience anything other than that object, and then eventually what happens is the object itself merges with them. Not literally, but all of a sudden their consciousness somehow transcends all types of physical experiences or mental experiences, and what they experience is a tremendous ecstasy. Yeah, it's an ecstasy. Okay. They call it samadhi, whatever, you know. The question is, what is that? So they say that that's spiritual, right? It's pretty good, because they're experiencing this super conscious state called samadhi, and they experience what's called nirvana, ilam haba, whatever they want to call it, right? To them, that's ruchnius, because what their understanding of ruchnius, and I want to show you why it's a mistake. Their understanding of spirituality is not physical. In other words, if all of a sudden I'm not experiencing anything, I don't hear anything, I don't see anything, I have no sensations at all, right? I have no thoughts, I have no feelings. In other words, I become a pure conscious being that in no way experiences anything through my senses, thoughts, or feelings, and so on. You see? And what happens is, as all of a sudden, it's almost like they become the consciousness. It takes a long time to practice that. But when they do that, all of a sudden they have become removed from the physical body. Not literally, but they have sort of like pushed the physical body out, even though they're still in the physical body, and they experience an incredible ecstasy. Okay? Is that spiritual? No. The mistake that they make is that just because you're not physical doesn't mean you're spiritual. You see, because there's a middle world called mental. Man is capable of a mental dimension. You see, it's a mental world. So what they have done is they have gone into the mental world. You see, and that doesn't make it spiritual. Spirituality is to be in contact, so to speak, right, with a spiritual aspect of self. It's not to avoid the physical, you see, because then merely you've become mental. You're in the mental dimensions, you see. But ruchnius is where you experience something from the spiritual world. Even though he said that you cannot detect a spirituality, but in a certain sense you can.
The neshama.
Oh,
spiritual, right?
The neshama. Why? Because you are the neshama. You see? So in a certain sense, the only spiritual entity that you can detect, not detect but experience, is your own neshama. That's ruchnius, you see. And they've made the mistake, in India, yogi and I don't know about Hinduism, but they have excelled in enormously heightening and focusing and concentrating the ability to concentrate. That's true. And when you concentrate to that extent, you can actually experience an incredible ecstasy, but because you've disconnected, so to speak, from the body. But that's not ruchnius, you see. Ruchnius is to feel or experience some aspect of your own neshama. And that you can do. That's the mitzvahs and Ruach HaKodesh. Well, that's not even Ruach HaKodesh, but that's nevuah. Nevuah is a spiritual experience, you see, because you can actually experience something as a result of your neshama. Actually, you go through your neshama to experience, and so on. So I want to point that out, that these guys are not spiritual individuals, you know. The concept of spirituality has been so diluted and so deformed, you know. Like a guy goes to a concert. Get this, you know. He goes to a rock concert, right? And he hears these guys and jumping all around, you know, that's what, they're jumping all around the place, you know. So you ask this guy, well, how was it? Oh, was it spiritual? You know, excuse me, you know, what was, no, don't use those kind of lashonos, you know. Oh, what a spiritual experience, you know. Or they'll go, they'll have go to an incredible restaurant and they'll eat, you know, gewaldige, you know, prime ribs, whatever, right? Oh, was that spiritual? You know, it's the word spiritual has been so beaten to death by so many different experiences, you know. So you never get fooled by these guys, you know, as spiritual, you know. He wouldn't know what spirituality is if he tripped over it, you know. But clearly the other stuff, you know, the yogis are much closer to spirituality, although it's not spiritual, because at least they've, in a certain way, they've removed the physicality by the focus on something else. So it's almost like they're so focused in on something that they and the object merge as one. So they actually experience their being devoid of anything physical. You have to experience it to know what I'm talking about. But anyway, well, it's certainly an escape, you know, but they don't do it for escape. They do it because they want to achieve that state of samadhi or nirvana. That to them is ruchnius.
Maybe they experience in their neshama.
No, it's not that either. No, it's not. No, because the only way to experience ruchnius is by doing something spiritual. Mitzvahs, or being a novi, doing what a novi has to do. You know, you cannot experience a spiritual anything, even from the neshama, just because you concentrate on a candle. It doesn't work that way, you see. But like I said, what? Yeah,
it take 3 hours to daven, one to get up, one to daven, one to come down.
Yeah.
That was spiritual?
No, with the Hasidim Rishonim, they used to meditate on God to prepare themselves. You don't mean them, you mean, let's say, Pardes, Rabbi Akiva.
It took them an hour to cease, to come back from where they were.
Yeah. So
where were they?
No, that was
spiritual.
What they did is they were so heightened in terms of who they're about to face that it was literally as if it was there. In other words, what they did is they emphasized the reality of tefillah, of standing in front of God, that it wasn't something, a guy davens, he has to imagine that there's God in front of him. You got to imagine that. You know what I'm saying? God's not in front of him. But you got to imagine that, you know? That's assuming he's not traveling around the world with his thoughts, right? You know, he's thinking about this, that, and so on, you know? But what they did is that they focused, they concentrated so much on the Rabbanu Shalom, and that they're standing in front of him, that not only intellectually it became as if that became a reality, but emotionally they felt as if they're standing in front of the Rabbanu Shalom. You see? But that's still physical. You know what I'm saying? So that's what they did, you know. But the Rabbanu Shalom did allow for ruchnistic experience, and that's nevuah, or Ruach HaKodesh, the real Ruach HaKodesh, or the real prophets. Nevuah. Nevuah is a spiritual state that the Rabbanu Shalom allowed a person to be in, and so on. which is very interesting. But even then, you have to understand how it works. Because even a Novi had to go through a certain process. Let's take the highest spiritual state of all, which is a Novi, okay? What a Novi did is he would go to school and learn how to become a Novi. He had to go to college, so to speak, you know? It was called a prophetic college, prophecy college, you know? University of prophecy, you know? And there were many in the olden days. Anybody could do that, you know? So there's a whole program. You know what I'm saying? You had to develop your midas, you had to do the mitzvahs, you had to rise level of kedusha. But eventually you were taught on meditation techniques and to meditate on divine names. And what would happen, which we'll get into later, is that would elevate you and it would put you into a trance state where you were not sleeping, you were fully awake, except what happened is your whole body became a trance. You see, so for all practical purposes, it looked like you were sleeping, you see. But the guy was fully awake inside, you see. Then what happened? Then all of a sudden, his imagination, because everybody has an imagination, where you can picture anything, it became a movie. It was a real, in real time. All of a sudden, the Olam Yetzirah, the upper world, would become open to his consciousness, and he would actually be able to speak to beings or malachim in that world. But when he spoke to them, he didn't see them as ruchnis, he didn't see them as spiritual beings. They themselves had to clothe themselves in the imagination itself. In other words, it was the imagination that could clothe them, but you see, and therefore he could speak to them. When, for instance, Rabbi Akiva, Rabbi Shmuel Atzmai, on Yom Kippur, so there was a decree that they had to all die. Remember the Asura Malchus, they all had to die by Adrianus. So they sent up Rabbi Shmuel, famous passage in Yom Kippur davening. They sent him up, right? So he didn't leave. What he did is he shut his eyes, he meditated on divine names, and all of a sudden he went into this trance state, right? And he was, his imagination, he saw malachim. In fact, he spoke to one of them. He was a man dressed in white behind a curtain. And that malach was a malach, said, it's over with. That's Xera. So like, huh? No. So what happened was, he saw this being in that world, Yetzirah, but only through the mediation of his imagination. That clothed the being, so to speak, you see? But it was in real time. He was really speaking to a malach, you see? Which is incredible. So so therefore, that type of Ruach HaKodesh, where you could actually speak to a real being, but it still has to go through the filter process called the imagination. You see, but it was real time ruchni. That's the most you can achieve. You see, where you can actually engage with ruchnis, the spiritual entities, but it still can only be through your imagination. You see, and that the Hashem did allow. That's Ruach HaKodesh, the real Ruach HaKodesh, not the today's Ruach HaKodesh is different. But the real Ruach HaKodesh, and that with Rabbi Shmuel, that was Ruach HaKodesh, because he spoke to somebody in Yetzirah. The real Nevuah, which is much higher than Ruach HaKodesh, you could see God through the imagination, right, in terms of whatever he would want to communicate to you. But it was the same thing. It had to go through the imagination. The Koach HaDimyon, the imagination of the person, garbed the Shekhinah, and the Shekhinah would talk to him. Like that's the Nevuah of Yeshayahu, Yirmiyahu, Yechezkel, that's all the Nevi'im. How did it work? They were not awake, they were in a trance, you see. And the Rebbeinu Shem spoke to them directly through the imagination. That's Nevuah. It's a spiritual experience, you see. But you can't see the Shekhinah or anybody really, it's undetectable. But through the imagination, you can, you see. And that's what they did. These other guys, like I say, in India, and all these guys, These guys don't speak to anybody, you see. But they do achieve a state whereby they can stop or put into abeyance, so to speak, the physical body. Yeah, that's why some of these guys can be buried for I think a week. He lowers his heart rate. They have tremendous control over the body, because we don't realize the focus of consciousness. We do not realize our power of thinking. If you ever learned how to concentrate, you see, it would be like a laser beam. It could do incredible things. And some of these guys have done that, and they've experienced ecstatic states. But that is not ruchni, you see, because all it is where the individual has in some way suspended his body and no longer subject to the nervousness and all the tics and the pain of the body. He doesn't even feel that anymore, you see. So he's not, so it's like the people have what's called out-of-body experiences, astral projections, you know. It's still physical. So then how in the world, I remember I once spoke to, and it's a real thing, you know, a relative of mine, and it was a woman, and she said that she sat in a chair, and the next minute she was looking down at her body. She was like floating above it. It's an astral, which is a phenomenon people have done, you know. So the question is, what in the world is looking at who? You know, so obviously consciousness is able to exit the body, but it's still consciousness. It's an interesting phenomenon. See, so in a certain sense, they've exited the body, and they can look down at the body. And they say they could travel. That's a very interesting field in itself, astral.
Can they get stuck?
What?
Can they get stuck in that state?
I don't think so. I don't think it gets stuck in that state, you know.
So why did Nebuah stop? That had something to do with physicality?
No, because Shechina left. Closed, shut down the door. That's the Golus. When the Beis Hamikdash was destroyed, that meant that you could not access the Shechina, so you cannot even access it through imagination. It was unavailable. It was a curtain, closed. So, you know, so the Rebbeinu Shem, that's the Golus. The Rebbeinu Shem left, so you cannot access the Rebbeinu Shem even through the imagination anymore. That ended and so on, you know. But anyway, so the concept of ecstasy through meditation is not spiritual, it's physical. Spiritual is when you actually can contact, you know, in whatever way, a ruchnistic being through the imagination, but a ruchnistic being. And then that's also ecstasy, but it's a whole different understanding of what spirituality is. So remember, a mental experience or a non-physical experience is not ruchnius. You see, it's merely a higher dimension of the physical world, like radio waves, energy, and so on. Obviously, a person can be outside his body, but that doesn't make him spiritual, you see. And then you have the whole phenomenon of what's called NDEs, near-death experiences. That's a whole interesting thing in itself, where people, they're dead, or at least, you know, and then they see a tunnel, they see a light. It's a whole thing, what that is, and so, you know. But that also is not spiritual. You see, it's a non-physical state. It can be terminated. In other words, if they go through that tunnel, whatever, then that's death, which means they become not only non-physical, then they come in contact with the neshama, and then they're in a different universe altogether and so on. But anyway, so I want to just tell you that this concept of Gashmias is a huge area. It just doesn't mean, well, there's spiritual entities and physical. No, the physical universe itself has a whole bunch of states, physical, mental, and so on. I'm trying to give you examples of that. You know, the whole concept of energy and matter and so on, you know. But basically, those are the two fundamental components of the Bria, you see. So that's what the Ramchal does in terms of the physical and the spiritual and so on. And remember, you can have a spiritual experience, but you cannot detect or experience the spiritual being directly. You can't do that unless he chooses to clothe himself in physical reality, or you can see it through your imagination. But you can never like, you know, a physical, one guy talking to the other guy, you can see exactly who that guy is, and so on, you know. You cannot do that to a true spiritual entity. Very important, even though you can have spiritual experiences, which seems to be a contradiction, but as I explained, is not, you know. So if you know some guy comes running over to you and says, hey, I just had a spiritual experience, right? So then you know he doesn't know what he's talking about, and so, and if he says, I really spoke to God, well, that's a whole different story.
Padded cell time.
Is what?
It's a padded cell time.
Yeah, it's padded cell, that's right, you know.
Voices.
Yeah, you know, it's Rahman, some people, you know, I remember there was once, they say, you know, there's a joke where some guy, he went into an insane asylum, you know, and one guy was saying, one guy was screaming, you know, I'm the Messiah, you know. So he was being escorted by a psychiatrist. He says, what's with this guy? Well, he thinks he's the Mashiach, Messiah, you know. So then he saw at the other, a couple of doors down, so there was some guy looking out to his bars, whatever, he's also in one of the, he was laughing. So he went over to the guy and said, what are you laughing at? He said, because that guy's crazy. He thinks he's the Messiah. He thinks he's the Mashiach. So this guy said, well, how do you know? How do you know that he's crazy, you know? So the guy says, well, how can he be Mashiach? I'm God, I didn't make a Mashiach. What's the problem here? You know what I mean? Each person has his own Mashiach.
So what is Moshe
Anyway.
face to face? What is that?
What?
When it said Moshe saw God face to face,
Upon him.
was that to imagination?
Yes, it can only be, but Moshe was a whole different level of Nevuah. Moshe Rabbeinu could have prophecy, right? Awake. I mean, he didn't have to be in a trance, you see, you know. And Moshe Rabbeinu can experience the Rebbe Shalom, but even that had to go through his senses. You know, it always has to, especially God, the Rebbe Shalom, you know, the Rebbe Shalom has to appear to Moshe. Remember, Moshe was a Novi. You know, you cannot experience a Malach, let alone God. It's impossible, you know. But if the Rebbe Shalom appears to you, right, then you can experience the Rebbe Shalom, which is obviously what a Novi does, but it has to be through the intermediary of a physical world. You know what I'm saying? So even if Moshe experienced the Rebbe Shalom, he experienced it, he heard the Rebbe Shalom, even though there's no source of the sound waves. You know what I'm saying? The Rebbe Shalom can create a sound wave with no source. You know what I'm saying? And all of a sudden you hear a sound wave, you see? Or if you want to, does he see God? Even if he does, it's like a person all of a sudden having a vision. But the vision is really what? The vision is really your imagination. You know what I'm saying? When you have a vision, you know, forget about a dream, but if you have a vision, right? Well, what is that vision? It's somehow your imagination picturing something, you see? Whatever that is. So that Moshe Rabbeinu could have. He could have a vision, again, using his koich hadimyon, the faculty of the mind that's called the imagination. So however the Rebbe Shalom appeared to him, you see, but he would see something, you know, mamash amar and so on. He would be awake, and it would be, but that vision was without any filters. That vision means Moshe Rabbeinu saw God in a vision as God would appear in Olam Atzilus, with the least amount of filters. Because everybody saw the Rebbe Shalom, but through different filters or lenses, you know, it would be as clear. What?
Became distorted.
Yeah, every Novi would see the divine images, but a distortion of that image. Because it depends how many lenses, how far away they were from the source of Nevuah, or the reality of Nevuah, the dimension, and that was in the world of Atzilus. Because that's where God is, in a sense of his relationship to Olam Hazeh. The Shekhinah is in Olam Atzilus, you see. But Moshe Rabbeinu also could speak to God and see God as in Olam Atzilus in terms of the vision, but there was no filters. There was like he was right up against that world. So there was only one, there was a filter or lens, which is the actual boundary itself. There were no other lenses that blocked that vision. He had the clearest vision that any man ever had of God. no person ever saw through the physical universe, whatever, that type of image or vision that Moshe Rabbeinu saw. And therefore, the vision of God was untold clarity, which is incredible clarity. No distortions, nothing vague. It was clear, and so on. And that was the greatest form of nevuah ever known. But even he had to experience Hashem through some type of a physical reality. There's no other way to do it. You can't even experience a malach without that physical reality, let alone the Rabbanu Shalom, which is obviously what he spoke to, and so on. But that's panim el panim. The clearest vision ever known to a man, to experience Rabbanu Shalom with the greatest clarity of vision. But again, only through the imagination or through the senses. Okay, so anyway, so that's the physical universe that the Ramchal describes. And there's as I just pointed out, there's a lot of stuff in what people think is spiritual, what is not spiritual, what is really physical. There's a whole mental universe, you see? And that's why it's very important to make these distinctions in the Olam HaGeshem, in the physical world itself, you see. So that's very important. Then the next thing Ramchal is going to talk about, of course, is the spiritual entities. Who are they? How many are there? What are they? And so on. But for that, we'll continue next week, So I just wanted to really go through the whole physical. Hope you guys have a handle on that, So just remember, don't get carried away if you experience something spiritual. It's not the real thing, although it could be in real time, but then you're not a Navi, so it can't be in real time.
What's the near-death experience? Near-death experience.
Ndes?
Yeah.
What about them?
You mentioned before that they're a whole different universe.
Well, I believe what they are. They seem to be real. There's a lot of people that seem to have them. It's hard to say. They're all frauds. What apparently that seems to be is that in certain circumstances, surgery, or complete exhaustion, or literally where the heart stops, whatever, that apparently the consciousness of a person, whatever that is, can actually leave the body, and can look down and hear everything. We all have a mental body. And what happens is that can be separated from the physical. It's like a mental body that coincides with the physical. But what it seems to be is a certain consciousness where you can actually, whoever you are, the I can actually be conscious of something outside of his body. You don't need the body to be conscious of something, which is interesting. So these NDE guys, apparently, the body's almost dead, whatever, right? And all of a sudden, at that state, the connection between the body and the mental body, with the consciousness of that mental body, actually separates. So is the person dead? Theoretically not, because he's dead when he's dead in the sense that the body dies, so he can no longer enter the body. You see, at that point in time, it would be interesting to if the body is dead, then that would probably be spiritual, probably. But these guys are still alive, right? They come back and tell you about it, right? I don't know what they tell you about. They're dead. You know what I'm saying? So therefore, as long as their body is alive, they can, however, separate from that body. So they can be conscious of their body, and they hear conversations. I mean, there's some incredible stories. There's some incredible stories. I'll tell you one story I once read which boggles the mind. And I don't explain it. It was a story I read years ago. It was a story of Reader's Digest. It's got to be 30, 40 years ago, where somebody was in Switzerland, I think one of the mountain passes or whatever, and all of a sudden he stopped because it was must have been a traffic accident somewhere, and the whole place was backed up. And so that person said, look, I don't know, but sounds pretty bad. Probably a crash somewhere further up, What I'm going to do is I'm going to pray for whoever is in that car. I'm going to pray for that person. So this person, started praying, whoever that person is, you know, that he should get well, God should be merciful. Whatever the tefillah was, you know. And eventually, of course, they cleared the accident, and they never, you know, everybody proceeded. A couple of weeks later, guy gets a phone call. Who's the phone call? He gets a phone call from the guy that was in the accident. He was like had to be like a mile away. It was not. I gets a phone call from the guy who was in the accident. It's astounding. He says, I want to thank you for praying for me. So the guy says, praying for you? How do you know what I was doing? I mean, you were mild. You actually you were probably either dead or dying, whatever. You know, how could you possibly know who I am and that I was on that line, you know, and that I was praying for you? So I'll tell you, I was out of my body, you know, and everybody was cursing me. It's guy, he's a rotten guy. Can you imagine? Because everybody, you know, what guys, you know, they honk. Hey, what's happening here, right? And everybody was cursing me, you know. But I could hear all the curses. But all of a sudden, I heard you praying for me. Out of all these claws of all these guys, I heard you praying for me. You see? So the guy says, okay. I mean, it's incredible, you know. He says, fine, but you know, how'd you know who I was and how to locate me? He said, what happened was I went down the line. I traveled. My consciousness traveled, and I took a look at your license plate. You know, and then, you know, fortunately, they revived them. They put him to the hospital. I mean, took a whatever, you know, he got better. And I had your license plate. I mean, it's incredible. And I looked you up. You know, it's not, once you have the license, you know. So I want to thank you for what you did. I mean, this story is like, excuse me. You know, but that's a classic near-death experience, which is, there's no way to explain that. And there may be many stories like this. There are other kinds of stories, but where people, you know, could not have known, you know, what was going on and so on and so forth. But this story was like, you know, the guy's out of his body, and then he travels to see the guy's license plate. But but the interesting, he could hear all the cursing. You know, it's like, that I find that very interesting. You know, he can hear Misheltem. You know, it's like, what do you mean? I got a chasna. I got, you know, guys when there's a traffic jam. You know what guys do? They go crazy. You know, but that he could hear and he could visit and see. That was just beyond belief. You know, so there is. But in order to what an NDE experience simply means that a person can leave his body. Yes, that there is some type of an entity, a being beyond and that being can have consciousness not in its body, which is astounding. Or else how can any of these people, you know, have this type of experience and know, and so on, you know? But apparently that is, and that's what I call the mental world. You know, the mental world and so on. Look, the whole concept of an aura, that you actually have an aura around you, and that people can feel that aura. You know, they get, and the aura changes color. They take, it's called Kirlian Photography, if I remember correctly. You know,
it's a spiritual hashpah?
No, see that it's not. It's part of the mental world. It's experienceable. That's the whole point. It's not ruchni.
But they take a picture before a guy put on tefillin and after he put on tefillin.
And
after he put on tefillin, he has the aura, and beforehand he didn't have it.
So what that was
attributed to the mitzvah.
Oh, so what that probably would mean is that the aura, which is physical, can change, just like the imagine. In other words, it still has to reflect in an aura, just like the perception of God or a malach has to come through the imagination. It still has to be clothed in something physical. It can't be pure spiritual. And an aura clearly is part of the mental apparatus of a person.
So it came from within, you're saying?
No, his mitzvah somehow tapped into ruchni, that right? And that ruchni released what's called a shefa, an influence that goes down, right? And tapped into his aura. And that aura he's experiencing, not the influence, the divine kedusha that makes the aura change. You see what I'm saying?
That happens automatic, but it takes time. It's like a person puts on film. He doesn't experience what he has from that ruchnius
It should take, no, it should be immediate.
No,
It should be immediate.
Pictures that they made.
Yeah.
They experimented with this.
Yeah, it should be immediate, yeah.
Where does the term...
Well, you see one thing, is there's far more to the human being than what medical doctors think or any of these people, you know, and they're not in contact with that mental world or the mental aspect of the human body, which it the human body clearly has a whole mental aspect that it can even leave the body, you know, and so on.
So I think by the
And
Shabbos
travel and see your license plate.
What was that?
And travel and see
Yeah, oh yeah.
mental body could travel.
Yeah, because it's not limited by space, obviously. Yeah,
So
it's a
it's
great
not
way to
gonna
beat.
show up.
It's a great way to beat the high prices of airplane tickets. Yeah.
The word
Landing is
intuition. Does
What?
that- Intuition. Does that cover, you know, like they say women have more intuition than
That's different. That's a different phenomenon. You know, that's called the idea. It's an insight. That's because apparently the mind. We normally think that the person has 5 senses, right? 5 senses, right? Right? We have 5 senses. Okay, but the truth is, so therefore, how do we access information about the world or about anything outside of us? Through those 5 senses, right? There's, you know, seeing, hearing, touch, smelling, and taste, and so on. How do we access reality? Only through those senses, right? But apparently, there's what's called extrasensory perception, ESP. You know, and that, and there are different kinds of that where a person can access information outside of the 5 senses. Somehow, and I believe that the mind, it's really from the mental body. That the mental body, which is aligned with our body, right? If you can leave the body and still be conscious and look, you know what I'm saying? There's something else going on in that body, you know? So therefore, it could be your brain is seeing something, you know, from the mental level, right, that you're not experiencing. So there is because you have a mental body, you could be experiencing information outside of the physical 5 senses. It's not arriving through the 5 senses, it's arriving because you exist on a mental plane, you see. And that would be extrasensory perception. But, you know, a lot of people that say they have it, but they don't, you know. But there are certain people that apparently that they do have this ability. They can access information not through the 5 senses. So the question is how? So I believe, like I just said, the mechanism of that is they can access information because they have a mental body. And therefore, a mental body is not tied down to the physical 5 senses, and therefore they can access information outside. But that's not Ruach HaKodesh. Don't make that mistake. That's because since we have this mental body that coincides with the physical, but actually can disengage from the physical at different times, it can access information beyond what the physical can. It has its own machinery. You know, I believe that's how it works and so on, you know.
That's independent of imagination, or that's...
That's it appears to your brain,
Yeah.
you know. No, it had nothing to do with imagination. You know, that's nevuah, you know. All of a sudden you just know something, you know. Look, you know how many times you hear people say, all of a sudden the guy says, uh-oh, I feel something happened terrible to, you know. And right, mamish, that time and that place, kachoya. How'd they do it? Because the mental body can receive information independent of time and space, you see. Obviously because there's a very strong emotional connection, you know. But there's all kinds of ways of doing that.
For them lives, they live together so long. They know what each one's thinking.
No, well, that's only because they're so used to their behavior they can predict it. That's not ESP. But there's a phenomenon called ESP. A lot of fraud out there, let me tell you now, you know, in terms of what is ESP. But apparently there are people that have astounding sense of, for those who are not frauds, that is, you know, a tremendous sense of extrasensory. But I believe it's because coinciding with the physical body, there's a mental body. And the proof of that is you can leave it. That's what astral projections are, and all these other NDEs and so on, you know. But the key to remember, it's mental, it's not spiritual. And the guy's still alive. And then these guys say they see a tunnel and a light and all that, and they know they go through that tunnel, it's over. Well, that's the death, and then then it becomes ruchni, spiritual, and so on. But because of that, which is interesting, I believe, a lot of these guys say, well, they see Yeshu coming to meet them. You know, they have a lot of this kind of stuff, you know. You know, he ain't come to meet anybody. You know. Yeah, I once said, well, he's not come to me, he's dead. Anyway, but the main idea is that why? Because since they're still alive, then their imagination takes over and provides them with what they think should meet them. You see? But if they ever died and then became ruchni, then of course, then it's ruchni, you see? So as long as the body is alive, what they imagine could happen, and whatever their belief system is, they will see that. You see, that's my take on this whole NDE experience.
The machines keep the body alive.
Yeah, okay.
But the machine says you're brain dead.
Yeah, but you know, look, what does it mean to be brain dead? How many times they said somebody was brain dead and then the guy woke up a couple of days later? You know, the brain is the most mysterious organ in the body. The human brain is the most complicated structure in the entire known universe. There's nothing that even matches it. You know, it has 100 billion neurons. It has a quadrillion synapses that can connect to the other. Nobody even knows what it is. It's a work which is so beyond possibility of evolution. It just boggles the mind. And nobody knows really what it can do, you know, in that sense, you know. It is so complex. I mean, nobody knows what thinking is. What does it mean to think? Does anybody know what imagination is? Does anybody understand what creativity is? Nobody even knows how you store memory. How can a neuron store an idea, a fact? You know, how does any of this work? It's beyond comprehension. How a brain could work altogether, yet it works. So believe me, it's far more than, you know, what most people imagine and so on, you know.
But
anyway,
about the neshama yisera, like when a person is maybe by the Shabbos shir.
Yeah, by the Shabbos shir, yeah.
A person can feel that neshama yisera coming. So that's the aura feeling.
That's your emotional capacity to experience your revived connection to Olam Yetzirah. Yeah, but it's still you only experience in the physical. You see, it has to go through some physical, portal. It cannot be purely spiritual. Yeah. So, you know, it could be through feelings, it could be through visions, you could hear something, but you can never see the actual spiritual being and experience the actual spiritual being. It has to go through the guise of something physical, you see, and so on. But anyway, I hope I've given you a real broad understanding of the physical world, how broad it is, that it's not pashut. You know, you begin to see all these experiences can be explained. But remember, spirituality is different. It is a domain which is unknown in the sense that you can never experience it while you're alive, you know, and therefore no experience. There are ways of interacting with the spiritual universe, but not directly. It has to be indirectly, like prophecy. Or the old Ruach HaKodesh, not the Ruach HaKodesh today. That's a whole different way of accessing information. But so the physical universe is very multifaceted, very complex. You see, and all that is under what's called the Olam HaGeshem. That's what Ramchal is saying. And then the Ramchal is now going to talk about the spiritual universes, and then we can see how they all fit and how they all come together. So it's really it's a beautiful topic, really, to understand. You see, look, even this topic is fascinating. I've explained stuff that, you know, most people have no clue of any of this stuff, you know. But you can see, once you have a certain structure, then you begin to see how everything seems to fit, you know, whether it be yoga, you know, or astral projections or NDEs, doesn't make a difference, so, you know. Okay, just remember there's a mental body, and that is what people confuse with the spiritual. Great. Any questions?
Do you remember during the Vietnam War, this Buddhist monk, it was famous, it was on the news constantly.
Yeah, what?
They set him up on the, with the wood, and one of his disciples poured gasoline over him and this. He sat there, they lit the match, and he sat there. Do you remember this?
No.
And
What happened to the guy?
perfectly calm through the whole thing, and he's burning up. And he was protesting the war.
Did he die?
Yeah, he was.
He died.
Set him on fire. But he was completely calm.
Yeah,
through the
that-
whole thing, and it was played on the news constantly. You could get on YouTube. It's amazing.
What that simply
someone
means.
could do that.
Well, look. That simply means that he had incredible control over his pain. That's all it means. Some people have that. There's some people that can withstand pain to an unbelievable degree, even though they're dying. That's all. That's all. Nothing spiritual about that.
If you got to a point you didn't feel anything, right?
Well, yeah. I mean, look. Obviously, he felt, but he was able to control himself and not scream. I mean, I'm sure he felt. The guy's burning to death.
He didn't move.
Okay, but that doesn't mean that. I mean, it's impressive, but that's about it.
Eliyahu Navi is a physical being or a spiritual?
No, spiritual. But when he comes to visit you, for those people who he visits, again, he will assume the garb of a person.
He never died. So
No, he never died.
So what happened to his physicality?
What happened to his body?
What happened to that state, the physical state that he always had? Transformed?
I mean, did he have? Apparently, he had zikuch. Yeah, there's only 3 people that never died. They had zikuch, which is astounding. Yeah, he's one of the people. Eliyahu never died. Who else? Serach Basosha. And then what's his name? Chanoich also never died. The Hashem took him, and that was it. So what happened is he had zikuch. They were able to transform their body, because you can't go into the Olam Emes without zikuch. Look, who went up? Moshe Rabbeinu. Remember that? He went up for 40 days. Maim lo shesisi. I didn't drink and eat for 40 days, right? So how do you do that? And then when he came down, you couldn't look at him because he had the zikuch. When your body goes through that zikuch, when it goes through the purifying, when all of a sudden you begin to remove the physicality of your body, then what shines through? The neshama. You can't look at the neshama.
So what does it mean? Moshe Rabbeinu, what happened? Moshe Rabbeinu went up, where did he go?
He went probably to Olim Yitzira, yeah. He went to Olim Yitzira, but not his consciousness. He went up. That's the difference.
His body.
He actually went up, yeah. I'd love to know who his travel agent was.
Inside Israel,
Maybe I really should know who his travel agent is.
heard God's voice, the first 2
No, he really went up, and he apparently, But in order for him to go up, he was the only one, who went up and came back again. Everybody else died, but he went up, came back. But in order to do that, he had to have an incredible zikuch of his body. He couldn't go as a physical. He went up. He went up with a body of the 7,000th year, where he was physical. In other words, his zikuch wasn't complete. But what happened, his body became inert. That's why he didn't need any kind of physical necessity. His body became inert, and but he had a body, it was inert, but it was still physical. So he did experience a certain level of purification in order to, and then he had that whole dialogue with the Malachim and so on, But he's apparently the only one that ever did that. Actually, Rabbi Shua ben Levi, he also did something like that, yeah.
We have the
Anyway.
An Amoria was dug up in the Sechtes Shabbos. 2 guys were digging in a field, and they hit somebody, and he said, "Hey guys, take it easy," like.
Who, the dead body?
Yeah, on a Moira, and he got up, and he was talking to them.
Okay.
So over there was
Well,
also
well,
Madrega and Zichuch that he had a certain amount of neshama left in him.
Well, I mean, are we talking about Tchias HaMesim here?
No.
Or we talking about that he
were
was
in a field and they came upon his body. They disturbed his burial place.
So what seems to have happened is that there was a measure of Tchias HaMesim, for whatever reason, that he was able to re-enter, so to speak, the neshama, re-enter, and then he was able to, activate himself. Listen, they say the story of the Ari. It's brought down the Shifchei Ari, where when the Ari knew he was dying, so he said there's a gzeir in Shemayim that he's going to die, and whatever the circumstances were. But he told them, I want you to, take me, put me on the table, whatever, but don't touch me. Don't put me in the mikvah. Don't touch it, don't put me in the mikvah, So they did the tahara or whatever, and then when the time came to put his body in the mikvah, because he was dead, so they stood back and said, okay, we are following your instructions. We're not going to move you or put you in the mikvah. What happened? See, the Ari got up. He was dead. The Ari got up. He went into the mikvah by himself. And then he went on the table again, and that was it. How do you do that? See? Obviously, there's a certain faculty, there's a certain ability of Tchias HaMesim that these people have. Or he wasn't so completely dead that, he wasn't inertly dead. He, whatever the Ruchnius is, but,
Elizabeth Shimon, they kept him in his aliyah for 22 years. He used to make Kiddush on Friday night.
Rabbi,
right, yeah.
Yeah, sure, Rabbi used to make Kiddush. Imagine what kind of Kiddush that is.
What's that?
Either it was Tchias HaMesim, or if not, then Rebbe wasn't completely dead. I mean, in other words, there are different chalokim of the neshama that leave, and then you're left with what's called Havla de Gami, whatever, So either he wasn't completely dead, so he was able to do that, or there was a Tchias HaMesim, that Rebbe was a Rebbe.
So can't you explain an NDE that way, that only a chelik of neshama comes out? And that's what travels.
Nah, these guys are not. The Rebbe was a Ish Kodesh. He's an incredible person. I mean, Rebbe could do that. These guys are just, they're still alive. These guys never died, or else how could they come back and tell us, right?
No, because maybe a chelik of the neshama stays there and the chelik comes out.
No, I don't believe that. I believe just mentally they were able to get out, and then they could function, But not it's not real death and so on, Even by Rebbe, you have to ask yourself, what was it? Maybe he wasn't. Although they buried him, obviously, I think they buried him over there, Rebbe.
Someone was in the aliyah for 22 years till the neighbors found out.
Yeah, the neighbors found out. No, it wasn't the maid, something like that. The maid disclosed the fact that somebody.
She's Magana, my husband like you.
Oh yeah, whatever. Okay, but so again, but apparently it seemed that Rebbe was dead, but his neshama was able to come back apparently and interact with the world and say Kiddush, but if his body was buried, just that somehow he made Kiddush. It was in the attic, whatever. He made Kiddush. That means his neshama can issue a sound wave that's Kiddush and so on, However it works. Anyway.
When they heard God's voice, died and then come back and heard it again, the second commandment, and died again and came back?
No, that was a real death. That was really death. That was a real Tchias HaMesim. That was a real...
The souls of Jews that...
Everybody died. Yeah, because you cannot tolerate that type of exposure to God and live. So like Ben Azai, they all died. They were just overpowering. The neshama couldn't stay in the body with that kind of exposure to the God, the Rabbi Hashem. But anyway, no. So he resurrected them. Tal Tchias HaMesim, however it works. That was a real Tchias HaMesim.
People in this room, were our souls there?
Yeah, of course. Yeah, everybody was there. No, not everybody was born. Everybody was there. Either you were there in a physical body, or you were neshamas all listening to this. Everybody was there. That's why if you see somebody and you see, you look very familiar, and then you can't place where, you say, oh, we're probably sitting together by Matan Torah.